Welcome to Architrave Gaming. I'm the Archmaster Matthias. This is a channel about D&D. Well, essentially D&D world building and actual gameplay, like hacks and tips. So you could call it homebrew, but it's really just replacing D&D with my own game system, one step at a time. Speaking of that, Patreon link in the description to help me actually make my own game and make my own world, because it's the next evolution of world building and a decent improvement on D&D 5e. Anyway, this is a video about, I'm telling you random ideas about my world building. So, here's one: multiple rings around planets. First of all, why don't any of our fantasy world have planetary rings? They're so cool, right? But what if you had multiple rings and they're all like, flipping around and they're like expand or contract, so every once in a while they can actually like combine and, stay together. So it's like a super ring, like super thick or whatnot, or it changes color, or like it's a different substance, or they actually smack into each other and like break apart and create this like visual display in the sky, or like all the little bits of meteor and comet and whatnot. Well, not technically comet, but all the little bits of dust and rock and whatnot. Rain down on the Earth, through the atmosphere. They get like caught on the atmosphere. They're like burning on the atmosphere, and they rotate, and then it takes like 100 years for them to actually totally dissipate, and they're just stuck on the atmosphere. Lots of cool ideas with planetary rings. Here's another one. What if you had a planet of? What if you had a planet of planetary rings? So you just have like an inner ring, and then an outer ring, and then an outer ring, and then a bigger one. So it's a big disk world of planetary rings. Okay, so you're hopping from one ring, to the other, and the ring itself, like in real life, is just like asteroids and dust and whatnot. What if it was tightly compacted enough that you can actually hop between them, and you can like walk on the space dust or something, right? Like there can be an atmosphere and gravity, and you can have all sorts of justifications for it, right? But the cool thing is, the planetary rings can rotate. Like, well, first of all, they can rotate like this, right? So like this kingdom is north of you, but it rotates around and now it's south of you. Or it may take like 100 years for it to move, but they're all like rotating in different directions all around each other, and they can stop and reverse and go the other way and all sorts of stuff, right? But then they can also rotate all sorts of ways, right? So they're flipping around, and if you have like Spelljammer spaceships, you can fly around, between them and whatnot. It's just a much more interesting setting if you have all these floating and spinning planetary rings, rather than just, oh, here's Earth, and it's Europe, and you're just walking around. It's just the Forgotten Realms, and we have unicorns and dragons and all the basic stuff everyone's had for forever, and it's just the same old boring world. It's like, no, let's make a planet of planetary rings. Moving on from that, what if we had planetary rings as like space rivers? There was the scene in Treasure Planet after the supernova happened. It was all blue, right? And it showed the ship just kind of like, flying along, and there were like these blue trails of light that are like remains of the supernova. It's like, well, what if we have planetary rings and whatnot, and they like spread out and just like snake through space, and those are essentially rivers of space dust that float through that float through space. And what if the planets just like float along those, and they can like float and be buoyant, and so there's like the half of the planet underneath the ring and the other half above it, or the ring is like really thick, or the planet is small, and so it's like submerged in the ring, and the lower half is always getting bombarded by space rocks and like the planetary ring, and the top half is all happy and fine. People are always trying to move to the other, or maybe it's like rotating and spinning, so like people are always trying to migrate, and it's a nomadic, like multiple societies, like the whole population of the planet are nomadic, because you always have to be on that top part of the planet, and maybe it only rotates like once every 100 years or once a year or something, so it just like rotates over, and then it's following on that planetary ring, and then it rotates over again, or maybe it rotates side to side. You can have so many variations of this, right? And it can affect your world building if people are always moving, and everything they build is destroyed the next year, decade, 100 years, etc., right? Because the planet turns over, and that side is completely bombarded, because it's like moving into all these space rocks and space dust as it's flying along, right? And so all the space rocks are just like going straight down through the atmosphere, just destroying everything you have. And you in the next cycle, when it turns back over, you go to the other side, and you just see craters and whatnot and canyons, and it's like, well, we're back home. We have to build it again. So like, that's so cool. How do the different races and peoples work with each other or fight each other for resources and whatnot as this planet is moving, and it may get smaller and smaller. It may start breaking up until bits of it are like flying off into the ring behind it until you have nothing left. Like, oh, it's really cool. There's just cool stuff. You can have one where there's a instead of it being like on a space river or whatnot, it's just the planet itself is inside a planetary ring. You know how you can have a planet and then a ring around it, and then it has moons. Well, what if the moon is actually in the planetary ring? It's in the same gravitational band, and so it's like it's not moving through the ring, so you don't have all that impact. Like the ring moves with it, around the planet, right? But it's like you're in there and you just see all these asteroids and space dust really close to your planet because it's right there. It's like a planet or a moon orbiting a larger one, or maybe you don't even need a larger planet or a star or anything, right? It's just like here's a ring, and the planet just moves with the ring, right? And there's nothing in the middle, or there used to be, or there's just like this destroyed bits of what used to be a planet, and it's just this asteroid graveyard, right? You can have so many cool, interesting planets and moons and places to build your fantasy world rather than just bog standard fantasy Europe, Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, Forgotten Realms. You can do something interesting, right? So much cooler to do something interesting. Anyway, here's another idea. You could have new layers of ground over time. So, like the fantasy idea that Earth just kind of like falls from the sky over time, maybe, or just like grows from underneath. So you could actually look at like you have your city and whatnot, and either the ground is falling or it's growing. But you build your city and the ground just rises up and up and up, and each foot of ground is a year, 10 years, 100 years, something. And so you have to like keep building on top of it, and you have to keep building your cities up and up and up. And that's essentially where you have dungeons, and they're all underground because it's like, the very lowest layer was back 10,000 years ago when the world was young and we built our first cities, and the ground just kept rising up and up, and we had to keep building and building. And you can have all sorts of like little ant trails and ant colonies, but it's like people, humans, dwarves, elves, whatever, building their buildings and whatnot, and then it's all just like covered over, and maybe at one point they're like, hey, we're tired of building new stuff all the time. We'll just build stuff that we'll build buildings that are designed to be underground, and they are designed to take all this weight, right? So we're still like purposely living underground, and maybe this is what the dwarves do, or they say, we want to build like some super giant dome, and then when all the dirt covers it, we essentially have this big massive cavern, right? And they put an artificial sun in there or something, right? And they can build little like air holes up, and they do have to do continually build, but they're building essentially little chimneys and air holes and whatnot. And then maybe at one point all the ground like breaks and starts over, or it flies up into space and everything flies up with it, and you have to start over at ground zero, or the ground like falls back into the core of the world and then starts growing up again. Or if everything fell from the sky like rain, maybe it evaporates somehow and then goes up into the sky again for the next cycle. So the ground like grows up 100 feet every 100 years and then drops back down and grows up and drops back down. And so people have all these, instead of a city, you have this tower of cities. And you're like, oh yeah, that's an ancient tower. Like the top one's the most recent, the bottom one's the oldest, and maybe once all the ground evaporates, goes back down, the city just topples over and falls like this massive tower. And you have all these sideways cities and all just these ruins of cities and these long lines all over the world. And that's the fantasy world you entered. I just came up with that, but that's the fantasy world you entered. Like, wouldn't that be so interesting? You have all these lines of fallen stacks of cities all over the world because we just had our cycle where the raising of the ground ended. Tell me you don't know any players that wouldn't want to play in something like that. That's interesting. That's cool. It's not just, oh yeah, here's Europe. Those are the hills and that's the forest. It's like, no, this is cool, right? You can have hills and forests and stuff, but interesting fantasy world. Make it a fantastic world, not just a fantasy world. Make it fantastic. Anyway, I have a $5 Patreon in the description if you want to fund this, because I have my own gigantic, enormous world where I'm putting all these ideas in. So if you want to fund it and help me quit my job and actually do this full time to, make a product and present it to you one day, then please do that. Also, I'm actively looking for team members to help me world build and design my own game and flesh out all the classes and subclasses. This is essentially D&D 5e if it was fixed, if it made sense. So yeah, like and subscribe, feed the algorithm, all that stuff. God bless.